Hello, and thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite Size Cybercrime, the podcast where we discuss cybercrimes and cybersecurity news. This week we're going to be talking about a coordinated attack against 30 different community water systems in the U.S. state of Minnesota. It all started with the city of Braham saying their water plant was offline for unknown reasons. This would be concerning in itself, but it did seem to be rather minor and isolated. But then it kept going. The city of Brahman did manage to get their water plant up after about 3 hours of troubleshooting and was able to filter water as normal. However, trouble was lurking for other cities in Minnesota. Multiple other communities began to report machine malfunctions in their local water plants. As a result, many had to switch to manual operations. Some of the other cities include St. Paul, the capital of the state, Plymouth, and Maple Plain. They've all publicly declared an outage of their IT systems as the water municipalities. So far, the state of Minnesota has not advised any people to change their drinking water habits. There's no boil water advisory or requests to drink bottled water instead of from the tap. In total, 30 different water systems throughout the state were impacted. And not too much information was being released, but it does seem to be a coordinated effort, just based on the amount that are attacked with very similar methods. The method of entry to each of the water plant systems was similar, as were the systems that were attacked. It was an Internet Accessible Programmable Logic Controller, or PLC for short. They're basically tiny industrial computers often used in, well, things like water plants. Some more information we know from the FBI is that the hackers accessed these PLCs and changed IP addresses and passwords on them, which prevented technicians from monitoring or controlling the systems within the water plants. Speculation that this is some sort of Iranian attack began almost immediately. Cyber attacks are not uncommon between nations at war, and the U.S. government has warned about an increase in Iranian attacks against public-facing U.S. utilities. Law enforcement and the U.S. government believe that Iranian threat actors are to blame for these attacks on the water systems, but this blame has not actually been officially placed. Though it does make sense, it is more likely for someone like a nation-state attacker that has a conflict with a different nation to want to attack some sort of public infrastructure. Ransomware attackers will do this sometimes, but ransomware is a lot more lucrative when they're targeting something a bit more private sector than water. You can hit institutions that make a lot of money, and there's not a ton of money in the public sector. Anyone who works in the public sector will tell you as much. Strangely, President Donald Trump has blamed Minnesota and Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, for the cyber attack against Minnesota. He said specifically that he believes Iran has better things to do than meddle with water in Minnesota, which was a bit more indirect, he paraphrased that. And that Tim Walz is corrupt and Minnesota needs to get its act together. That was a direct quote. Not to get overly political on this podcast, but I don't think Donald Trump understands cybersecurity very well, or the concept of attacking public infrastructure generally being extremely relevant to a conflict that you are engaged in. Yes, Minnesota specifically is not at war with Iran, but Minnesota is a state within the United States. What's being attacked is ultimately United States infrastructure, and very important United States infrastructure. There is no evidence that Tim Walz is personally responsible, although Trump may be sort of correct about one thing, which I won't even give him too much credit for that. That being, the state of Minnesota is incompetent about their cybersecurity. I don't think the state of Minnesota is uniquely incompetent about their cybersecurity. I think a lot of the government is. And I also wouldn't say it's necessarily incompetent. I would be nicer about it. I would say it's often an afterthought, often overlooked, or improperly implemented. We've seen time and time again different government systems are attacked by hackers, and many times it's not even nation-state hackers like Iran, and it's just people trolling or even single people trying to cause problems for no reason. Or, of course, it is a coordinated effort to harvest data. After the incident in Minnesota, it was also reported to the FBI that there were more attacks on water systems occurring in 7 different states. Though the FBI declines to actually name those states, we do know for certain that Michigan is one of them, because they have also reported experiencing some cyber attacks on their water systems as well. So, Michigan officials have also stated that the water is still safe to drink and everything is operating safely. Attacks on critical infrastructure like this can be pretty scary, and well, they are pretty scary. Thankfully, for the time being, we do have manual overrides for these, and people are able to safely operate water plants in manual mode. One thing to note is that this was actually pretty easily preventable. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying about cybersecurity often being overlooked or an afterthought and not implemented properly. The basic fix for this is to simply secure the PLCs better. There is no reason I can think of that a water purification plant's programmable logic controllers should be directly connected to the internet without something in the middle that is stopping you from just connecting to it directly, like a firewall or a reverse proxy or something else. PLCs should be internal only, and if for some reason employees need to access it from outside of their workplace, they can use something like a virtual private network to access their work network and then access the PLCs. They also should have been behind a firewall with access controls preventing any outside access, and the passwords on those devices probably should have been a bit more complicated than what they were, which they were most likely shared passwords, and the issue with shared passwords is that they're pretty much always weak passwords, and this is kind of the Achilles heel of many of these types of systems. There could also be some sort of software switches or even hardware switches in place that prevent certain controls from being changed without some kind of either manual override or dual person control, which is when two people need to use the control at the same time in order for it to work. And these prevent exactly this from happening, and they also help prevent against a rogue, disgruntled employee from deciding they're kind of tired of their job and they want to cause some problems. I can't say I'm too surprised something like this happened if the systems were exposed to the open internet of this. If anything, I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner. And I will say, I do think Iranian threat actors are the most likely case in this scenario, though it doesn't exactly take a genius to exploit a random unsecured device sitting on the open internet, and it also doesn't take a genius to see that there are a lot of those that are very similar. And, well, I don't think I need to dispute this, but I do not think Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, was responsible, especially given Michigan was also targeted, and I don't think he's in charge of their cybersecurity either, nor is he in charge of the cybersecurity of the 5 other states. What does concern me is that there is still something that's happening in this way. I'm not entirely surprised, as there have been many budget cuts to federal cybersecurity programs, unfortunately, and naturally that does lead to things going overlooked. Cybersecurity is often something that people will cut the budget on, assuming, and maybe just hoping, that it won't be relevant, but, well, unfortunately it's always going to be relevant. You can be the victim of a cyber attack at pretty much any point in time, and the more money you kind of put into it, the less likely that is to happen. But of course, people have a lot of things that they need to spend their money on in an organization, besides cybersecurity, so it is easy to just kind of disregard it in some way and hope for the best. But then we get things like this happening. Thank you to SPI.gov, the Hacker News, and Bleeping Computer for information on this cyber attack. And of course, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite Size Cybercrime. And until next time, stay secure.